Hey, Rob here to give us part two of our finals week. We've got part three to come next Monday. I'll be doing that. But what an episode! What a great episode! I really really loved the outcome of what we had happen last night. Our final four is now whittled down to our final three, and we had we now left with an amazing final three. One that I am pretty shocked to get such. I feel like we are so lucky to have a really strong final three like this, with Hayley, George, and Flick being the last three remaining, and that's exciting. Like, you know, in in all logical outlooks, George should have gone home a long time ago, and George has time and time again defeated the odds, and then just how it's happened, Flick pulls off a clutch win, and gets to decide who goes home, and wants to go for Hayley, and this is the genius of this episode. I think it's something that I have been very big on for a long period of time. That, you know, individual immunities are great because they mean you get to the next stage, but they don't dictate anything. Only one individual immunity will dictate anything, and that is the next one. Winning final three means you take whoever you want to final two. That's the only immunity win that will guarantee your absolute power. Whereas more often than not, winning an individual immunity or having a hidden idol, as awesome as that is to have, doesn't give you control. And this is what we see here, in last night's episode, and we saw it in season the second season of the new reboot of Australian Survivor, not the old stuff. I don't count those ones. We see Jericho push for a "let me take you to fire," and it worked for him, and he ends up going home and win. He ends up going on to win the game. So here we have the situation where Flick comes from behind win. She's the underdog story. She's the only Brawn left. She's got a lot of friends there. So her whole family's history and the story that comes behind her. It's a great underdog story to get that win. And then you have the situation which still, as much as I love George, we're at day 40, I think it was day 45, probably 46, 47 by the time this moment airs, where George says, we could push this to 2v2. I'm going to have to make fire if Flick doesn't win, or if Flick wins. And he doesn't know how to make fire. For a student of the game, because George clearly is a student of the game, it just seems like such an important element, not the survival element, but just if your life being in the game depends on being able to make a fire, if you end up getting yourself into a fire making challenge, then you really, really need to know how to make fire. And 40, 45, 48 days out in the outback with no other way to make it, you should have learnt by now. If you should have been trying. And it baffles me that time and time again we get to this situation near the end where, well, in American season, well, up until recently, there was that little bit of time where the third final person was decided by the fire making. So it's just this strange phenomenon that happens, that they don't actually learn to make a fire. It goes back to the other night's episode where Hayley was like, you could have an idol, and what has Hayley done about it? Nothing. Aside from George getting rid of Way, George could have easily aimed that sniper at Hayley, and Hayley would have gone home because she did not have a plan B. Being able to make a fire is in this same category. If you don't know how to make a fire, you're screwed. I mean, you can get, yeah, it's just, and then we also watch Cara show him how to make fire, but Cara doesn't show him how to make fire. Cara shows him how to get a spark from a flint. That's not the same thing. I carry a flint around with me in my bag 24/7 for the off chance I need to practice my fire making skills. It's not as easy as just making a spark. It's not as easy as just scraping the magnesium. There is a little bit more to it than just that. So George going, now I can make fire because I can make a spark from a flint. I mean, not that we had to go there. We had an absolute piece of genius from Hayley that meant we don't need to go to a fire making challenge. But if we did go to a fire making challenge, my God, what are you going to do? What George would have gone home, which thankfully he didn't, and we're left with two of the best strategic players and a really, really likable player in the final three. We've lost the Way and the Caras, who had no chance of winning. They were the GOATs, and it's such a joy to get to a season where there are no GOATs. I mean, this is beautiful. It could go anywhere. Like, I still think Hayley will, she's right. Keep me around because I have the best chance of beating Flick. She probably will beat Flick. But, you never know. George could win. It's all, you never know how this thing happens. You never, it's just the odds are in Hayley's favor to win the final immunity. But what I'm just in awe by that little bit of strategy, and goes to prove the point that having an immunity and necklace, being safe doesn't mean you're in control. And we see Flick's mindset, and this is the right mindset. Flick, this is where, this has been the thing of the past few episodes. You don't need to get out the challenge beast. In this situation, Flick was 100% correct. Hayley was the person to go. She needed to go because they'll vote. If it comes down to Cara, Flick was gone. Flick would already be gone. It doesn't matter. So they need. She needed to vote Hayley out. So she's made the right decision there, stepping back from George, and this is where being the physical presence, or trying to vote out the person who is more physical than you, or has a higher chance of beating you at the end, that's when it becomes really important. When we saw Dave vote out Brooke. Brooke is a challenge beast. Hayley is now, in this circumstance, sitting there as a challenge beast. She's won 3 individuals. Emmett, he's a challenge beast, won 3 individuals. You don't want to be going up against these people who have a much higher chance of winning when the ultimate power comes in winning that individual immunity. And there is only that one tribal, that last tribal, where that individual immunity is ultimate power. So Flick's decision to go, I'm not going to go after George anymore. Yes, George is a huge strategical threat, but Cara isn't. If I can get rid of Hayley, I then win next. I have a much higher chance of winning the next immunity. Then it's in my control. I vote George off and done. The 2 greatest threats are gone. Now I vote versus Cara. It's a win-win. Everything wins. It comes up $500,000 for Flick. So she made the right decision there. And unfortunately for her, Cara plays the game. And Cara plays the game with just a beautiful heart. And she's saved. She pretty much got herself voted out, luckily, from the save by trying to save George. She was lucky with the twist. Otherwise, she basically got herself voted out by saving George, which is such an honourable thing. She's such a great. They're great qualities to have, obviously in life, but in the game of Survivor, really, really awesome qualities to have. And then we have that conversation with Hayley and Cara, where Hayley's pretty sure, I've chatted to Flick, it's George, easy, and it hasn't dawned on her that she's actually a greater threat in this moment to help Flick get to the end. And it's only when Cara says, yeah, George is a go, but Flick's been telling me it's you. And obviously we don't know when these conversations happened. It's all edited for us. But in what we're shown, it looks like Hayley doesn't really twig that maybe she needs her plan B. She then realizes that she's actually the one on the chopping block. and needs the plan B. And this is what I love about it, because she's been put in this, she's found herself in this situation where that unfortunately Wei is no longer around, and that's her fault. I won't back down from that. She's put herself in this situation. However, she's played it to perfection. Being now solo versus a really strong two in Cara and George, and then having Flick, the way the people that are left has worked out in Hayley's favor is really, really amazing. Because we see the process, and you could try and push for fire. Hey, go for someone. Let's just try and let me make fire, like Jericho did, beg for fire. But instead, she gets every single one of those people to write a different name down. Like, this is the final four vote. She hasn't won immunity. She completely controlled the vote. Flick writes down Hayley because Flick wants to get rid of Hayley, and she thinks that's the plan. And then she manages to do split the tight two, the power couple, the King, George, and the Baroness. She manages to split them, and she splits them really beautifully. And then she plays it as well. It doesn't matter. She pitches the idea that moving forward, the chances of George being there, if I'm not here, are zero. And George knows that, because he can't beat Flick unless some fluke crazy thing happens. But George hasn't come anywhere close to winning one of these immunities. He works his hardest and he does the best that he can do, but he doesn't put up a fight to challenge. So he knows he can't win. So Flick's pitch to George, Hayley's pitch to George is, you need to keep me because I'm your only hope of beating Flick. Which means if I beat Flick, there's more chance you're going to stay. There's zero chance you're going to stay if Flick wins. So correct. No one wants to take George to the end. You can't. Someone who has played that strong a strategic game from the first day. And we're not talking American Survivor. Like, we're talking 48 total days, I think. It's a marathon. Australian Survivor is an absolute slog. And this guy has been strategic every single day. He didn't have to pull off the accelerator. He's been pedal to the metal the whole way down. He's been making moves. He's been making mistakes. He's been learning from his mistakes. And then he's just been out playing everyone. So there's no chance Flick takes George. So the perfect pitch to George. She goes to Hayley. Hayley goes to Cara. Same pitch, except with the slight tweak that for you to win, you actually need to make a move. And if you don't make a move, George wins. Every move you've done, doesn't matter. Every move you've done, George claims everything, apart from saving. And also George helped Wei. I mean, that was a beautiful moment. Like, whether that's George's nature. George also knows he can't win. But that also could be jury management. Like, Wei's been saying just recently that George isn't exactly as nice as he thinks he is. The very next thing he does is pretty much carry her across. And he's not the strongest guy. He carries her across that pole. It's a beautiful moment. Potentially a moment that helps win a vote to help him get the $500,000. So you really have to. So Cara really needs to think about this. But at the same time, Cara doesn't actually need to do much. Because regardless of what Cara does, she's pretty much the one they're going to take. Whoever wins next, Cara's going to go through because she's the least threatening. So she's in this strange situation where if she does nothing, she goes through. If she sides with, let's get rid of Hayley with Flick, and we go to fire, she would have gone through. Because it's now down to George and Hayley. That's it. They do fire. Cara goes through. Cara makes it to the final two very, very easily because she's the only one that doesn't really have much of a resume apart from saving George and just being a really nice person. But that doesn't win you the money. So Cara falls into this hole that she's played with her heart, and she talks about it a lot in this episode. George plays with the head, she plays with the heart. She's played with the heart for so long, but maybe she needs to try and play with her head. However, Jack and I talk about this quite often. You can't leave. You can't have a last minute move. And this was one of my big things about. I wanted Hayley to make more moves. Just because and she's already done plenty anyway prior. I'm just very picky. But you can't just wait and just drift along and make the move at the final four. You're going to, one, it still isn't going to be strong enough if someone else has been making moves the whole time. And two, there's a high chance you're going to make the mistake. There's nothing Cara could have done. Cara went out trying, which is awesome. She tried to make a move. But if Cara had played some moves and not just rode George's coattails all the way to the end, sitting in George's little carriage and just being dragged along, she might have had a chance. But she's now put in a situation of no matter what, being second or taking a risk, and hopefully it pays off. And at least it looks like I've done something, and then I have something to say. Because if Hayley did vote out George, Cara is at least part of that. It gives her one thing. And then she can talk a bit better and try to make it work. But regardless, Hayley has now planted 2 different seeds for the exact same result. And has now put herself in complete and utter control of what happens. And when she reads the final votes, we have, like I said, we have Flick voting for Hayley, Cara voting for George, George voting for Cara. They split up. Hayley knows how important it is for George to win this game. And she knows the odds are 0 if George doesn't side with Hayley. So when it comes to whoever Hayley wants, yes, of course, taking Cara to the end is the easiest way for her to win. But it's not the safest way to get to the end. The safest way is to trust George and know what George wants to do. And this is why I wanted to vote George out earlier, because you know what George is going to do. George is dangerous. George is now no longer dangerous, unfortunately. George, with his threat so high, unless he wins immunity or manages to really sell the fact that Flick could pull jury votes for being kind and nice to Hayley, or really sell the fact that no one likes me, people like Hayley, to Flick, he doesn't actually stand much of a chance to make it to final 2. I hope he does. I would love to see a Hayley and a George final 2. That would be brilliant. That's my 2 really great game players who were never always on the same team. I think the last time we saw that was Dom and Wendell in I think that was Ghost Island, where they ruled the whole game together and made it to the end together and didn't have a chance to vote each other out. Whereas these 2 haven't really worked together very often. And George brings it up. It's this pitch that Hayley has presented at this jury, or this tribal, is much stronger than the pitch she presented when George and her first went toe-to-toe, where George absolutely somehow blew her out of the water and she was voted out. So we now are left with this beautiful situation that Hayley dictates the final 3, and she hasn't won individual immunity. And as far as a passive game, and I am talking about Hayley's passive second half, this one move pretty much negates a lot of that, because it's one thing to get through on individual immunities, but like I said, they don't mean shit. They really don't. It's awesome, and for those who watch this often, I'm a big fan of the physical powerhouses. I say it all the time. Give me another chance to watch Aussie dominate, or a Joe or a Malcolm. These players who have just been such dominant forces in individual immunities excite me. But strategically, it means jack all, and we've seen that. We've seen in two episodes how an individual immunity and a hidden idol don't actually have as much power as people think they do, or people are afraid of them. You can outmaneuver them, and Hayley does this to perfection. This is an A-class move. This makes Hayley look so much stronger than if she did win. If she was to win that immunity and send Flick home, or send whoever she wanted home because she could, it still doesn't look as powerful as outplaying someone who has the necklace. That's why Jericho pretty much sealed his win. He didn't do amazing in his final speech to the jury from memory, but this moment, this play, this final four play was a beautiful piece of work. It's the winning move in my eyes. It's much better than, because that's hard to do. It's so hard to get a power couple. Well, a power couple they'll turn on each other eventually. They should, not always, but it's hard to break up the power couple, be a single and have another single, and then have everybody vote differently, and your vote is the only one that's the one that makes the one that's the killing strike. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So her voting Cara was the right move, because it's the best chance she had. Like she said, I'm going to trust George is going to take my plan more than Cara would, because Cara doesn't need to. Cara would get to the end regardless, and it's more of a risk. Even if she does, obviously it would have been better if she does, because you don't have to compete with George anymore. And George, you never know George could get to the final two. He's very, very good. It'd be crazy if he does. It's so crazy, because if I was there, he would have gone home weeks ago. And not because of why other people wanted to get him home. Most people spent this whole time wanting to get rid of George because they found him annoying. No one wanted to get rid of him because he was just so good at the game. So for him to make the final two is really, really tricky, but he's got away. He's got away with words. So depending on the sales pitch, and that sales pitch is, am I likable compared to you? I probably will get less votes than you. And he has to really start to downplay. He has to do that little thing he does where it's like, don't vote for me tonight. That little, I really like that subtle manipulation move. It might not seem like much. It might seem like a little bit begging. It might seem like there's not much seriousness to it. But that little comment is just trying to decrease his threat. It's trying to also say that I'm not in control. You have your fate. My fate is in your hands. Is it? No, it's not. It definitely isn't. It's all in George. George is completely in control here when he says these things. But these little things are really important in manipulating people around and helping them do what you want them to do, but also they think they're doing it. So much like when he didn't do this, but much like he should have done with Wei. He should have got Wei to, who do you want out? If George could take a bit of that that dominance of this is how it's going to happen, and allow someone else to think they've come up with a plan by, a bit of inception there, he would have, that would have been amazing. He would have just possibly been one of the greatest players I've ever seen. He's definitely one of the top tier players I've ever watched play. And just beautifully raw. I love the fact that he's made mistakes, and I love the fact that he never stopped trying, and I love the fact that he never slowed down. So to see him make it to the end would be awesome, but it'd be probably his best sales pitch to be able to get him there. His best political speech to be voted in. I find it very difficult. Flick needs to win, but I still think Flick is probably the good. She's the good person to take, whoever you are. George and Hayley probably don't want to take each other. I would think that. but Hayley keeps mentioning friends on the jury. And this is something I actually just remembered then. Because you don't see it much in American Survivor, and I don't mind it. I don't mind the when you see the new jury member come out because they've had a shower, they've washed themselves, they're wearing their clothes, they've dolled themselves up, they've had a shave, whatever it is they've done to themselves, and then the people still left in the game give them a cheer. There's a bit of banter back and forth, and I don't mind that. Like, it feels like it's a lot more serious with the American Survivor. But one thing we've seen is Flick has really been playing up to her friends on the jury there. The winking that I'm not going home because obviously I've got the idol. Danny probably would have told them all that she's got an idol. So she's playing these little things like, oh yeah, I'm not, whatever, and winking to the jury. And then obviously the idol becomes null and void. She saves herself, but it was really irrelevant and she had no power in that vote. This is the same thing here. She plays the fact that she's won the necklace and she plays it up to the jury. I find it a little bit cringy because it's not. I find it cringy because it's really having no outcome. It's great to play up to the jury, but you've got to back it up with a strategy. And she hasn't been in control either of those votes. George controlled the last one. Cara controls this one. So that way she plays up to the jury and showing like, I mean, I've got something, I've got an ace up my sleeve, and then you've only got an ace and someone else has got a royal flush. It's a bit funny. So I'd be pretty sure I'd take her to the end, whether I'm George or Hayley. I don't feel like I have more friends, I have more Brawn on the jury than you do really works in her favor. What works in her favor is her story, her heartbreaking story, and the fact that the underdog, I mean, she's not the best underdog we've ever seen. She's an underdog that's got to the end through the pure and simple fact that the other people in the game still were outplaying her, and she wasn't actually enough of a threat to need to go home as far as strategy goes. So I feel like Cara is definitely not Cara. Flick should definitely be a number 2. You're the one you're taking to number 2, whether it's George or Hayley. If Flick wins, it's a really hard one for her to take, either of them, because I just think they've both been really, really great strategically. George, much stronger strategically than Hayley, although Hayley, and that's only because Hayley has spent a lot of this second half very passive. I really rated Hayley higher than George in the early game. Aside from the fact that she didn't vote Danny out, she really should have taken that blind side and not made it a little, haha, here it comes, and actually struck. That would have been really, really good. But her game isn't as out there as George's is, and isn't as, George is wandering around with an idol and the chest open, the shirt open, showing the chest. Her game's a lot more subtle, and I really like Hayley's game a lot more for the subtle reason. But George has just been a masterclass. George is more disliked. Flick maybe could take George for being disliked more, but he's outplayed everybody. Hayley hasn't outplayed George. She'll only outplay George purely on physicality. Whereas, there's the 3 pillars. There's the 3 pillars of your survival resume or whatever. It's that social element, the strategic element, and the physical element. George and Hayley both have really strong strategic and social elements in my eyes. Their pillars are really, really high. But Hayley's got Hayley's got a much, much stronger physical pillar than George does. George's physicality is his only weakness. And and his strategic mind is definitely more in tune than Hayley's is. But just because his strategic pillar might be taller or higher or worth more than Hayley's strategic pillar, his physical pillar being so small, when it comes to the crunch, that's the thing that will let him down. And it's hard to see Flick wanting to take him because the strategic game was just amazing. Flick has a case to pitch if she makes final two against Hayley, in the sense that Hayley was actually unanimously voted out of the game and saved from a twist. Sure, it's part of the game, but she got lucky. The reason Hayley is still in is pure luck. There is no, you could argue otherwise as well with Flick, but there's no real luck. Flick was never voted out of the game. She didn't dodge a bullet. She ducked and weaved. I guess she did duck and weave, and there was other people that were more threatening than her that had to go before her, an Emmett, a Danny. But she got to the end, and she got to the ends very well, and a clutch win right when she needed it most. She's got a case to argue that she probably deserves it more than Hayley because of that reason. Hayley has been voted out. She got it. She had to come in for redemption, but she had to go after getting her torch snuffed. People have probably voted Hayley more than they voted Flick. She's received more votes. So she has a chance, and she has something she might be able to do against Hayley, whereas I just don't think she's got anything she can do against George. A Hayley-George battle would be awesome. Would be a really awesome way to see how this goes. And I think Hayley comes up trumps if it's Hayley and George, just not because of my whole sports bet thing, but Hayley comes up just because of that last vote that just happened, where she was able to outplay finally. And she was only able to outplay because Flick came for her. Flick wanted to get rid of Hayley. If Flick wanted to get rid of George would have done the same move. George would have been able to do that. George wasn't on the chopping block. He didn't need to. And he had to. This was the one move he's had to be a passenger on. He was part of the move, but it wasn't his move. But that final move is a stroke of genius. It's a perfectly executed move, taking away the power of someone who thinks they've got power, and controlling a vote when she was the one that was actually should have been going home. So well executed move, and the fact that she has that physical side to her game that George just lacks, I think that balances the tide a little bit, and just kind of probably sways it in her favor. If it does come down to George and Hayley, they both should get their fair share of votes, but I think it'd be very tight. But Hayley should come up trumps if she's learnt to talk a bit better when it comes to fighting against George and the diplomatic side of things. George really destroyed her, and even though I don't have to admit anything sort of politician style, and Hayley just kind of sat there going, but you're lying, you can't say that, you're lying. If she can keep a level head and really not focus on George, because George could probably fluster the best of you, the best of anyone really, when he starts talking. If she can just focus on her gameplay and ignore the fact that, make the fact that she got voted out a really big positive, and have her little redemption thing that she needs to do, but then the strategic moves plus the physical moves, she should win. But it'd be tight. It'd be really tight. I think that would be like 1 or 2 votes in it. Could go either way. Flick Hayley, I reckon, Flick gets a few votes. She definitely will get Danny's vote. I don't think Danny will sway regardless. Danny will love the fact that she's still there and was able to survive the brains, which is annoying, because Danny was the one who was saying you're playing a boring game when it's all brains, yet when they were doing it as Brawns, it wasn't boring. I hate the hypocritical side of those things. So someone like Danny should actually focus on who played the game, but I think Flick gets Danny's vote regardless. Danny versus Hayley versus Flick. Hayley probably comes up with 4+ more votes than Flick. George probably should win against Flick. In my eyes, in a landslide, Hayley gets a couple. Flick gets a couple, but George should really get most of the votes. And if he talks well enough, which he can do, could outdo Hayley and use the fact that he had no physical side. Yes. So for George to outdo Hayley, he has to say that the fact that he didn't need the physicality to get to the end. Hayley might have needed all three, but even with all three, she was voted out. George was never voted out. George was enemy number one for quite a long time. So he could definitely outplay her. Look, it's a great final two. Hayley and George might be the greatest final two that we've seen in a very long time. I mean, it's a great final three. I wish we played final three in Australian Survivor. But it's a strong final three, and it's really great and exciting. But I do think Hayley will get there just at the end. And with the Brawn tribe, I think the Brawn tribe has the ego that comes to the Brawn tribe with challenges and stuff. I feel like they might respect the fact that Hayley did so well in challenges, winning 3, potentially 4 individual immunities. But we'll see. I'm hoping you're all enjoying the season. It's a great one. I think it's a great one anyway. Great characters. I am a little bit. I'll bring in my overall recap next week once we have our winner. But I might just leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks Faith for commenting on the bottom and making me spend hours reading all your comments. But I love it. I'll get back to them eventually. But yeah, please again, like, subscribe, do the regular YouTubey things. But hopefully I'll see you guys next week.